With more stimulus being debated, from another $1,200 check or even as much as $6,000 per person, it brings up the topic of how much debt the US is taking on and if we are in a debt bubble that is waiting to burst, and what does this mean for our money. As of now, the United States has almost $25 trillion of debt. Things continue as they look like they are with more stimulus being considered. We can soon see around $30 trillion of debt. Just to put this debt into perspective, it is enough to pay off everybody's mortgages and student loans and auto loans, with enough left over to give everyone a $2,500 check. So we are looking at an unfathomable amount of money that the United States currently owes. But what does this actually mean for you and me? Is it something to actually worry about? And will this debt actually ever be paid down? Before we dive deeper, don't forget to like and subscribe to see more videos. To begin, let's ask, does the US actually need debt in the first place? Can it just pay off stuff with the money it has and keep the budget at a surplus? If you don't have $10,000 for a family trip to Disney World, you should not take out a loan to go on that vacation. That would be a poor financial decision. So why would the $25 trillion of debt be any different? Debt is debt, you would think, for people in government. But personal finance principles don't work when you are running a country, and here's why. At their cores, running a country and running a business are fairly similar in terms of finances. There might be times where you don't have enough cash on hand to continue expanding your business. Instead of hindering expansion or even downsizing, you might want to consider to take on some debt, because you know in the future you will bring in enough money to pay this down. This is very similar to a country. Countries have what is called a GDP, or Gross Domestic Product. This is the entire market value of all goods and services a country produces, along with all the revenues they bring in. GDP is one general measurement to see if a country is growing and production is increasing. If a country's GDP is growing, this generally means that the average citizen is wealthier. But just like a business, a country wants to keep growing and the country still needs to run. Roads still need to be maintained, infrastructure still needs to be built, police, fire, and other services still need to keep working. A lot of these services are paid through our tax dollars, and just like any other business, there might be times where revenue isn't high enough. When that happens, you have some options, either cut funding or raise taxes, which the general public usually doesn't like. Or the third option, which is to take out some debt to keep things moving. The US government gets its debt usually by issuing bonds. By buying government bonds, you are loaning the United States money and they will pay you back in interest over time. This is one of the safest investments you can make because the loan is backed by the United States government, and the chances of them defaulting on these bonds is slim to none. If the United States actually started defaulting on their loan payments, the whole world economy would have massive issues, and we would likely see a global depression. That is why the United States government bonds are one of the safest investments, but have little reward in terms of growing your wealth. So who actually owns all these bonds? You always hear things like the United States owes China so much, and they could call for these loans anytime they want and take us over. In truth, 32.5% is owned by US investors, or its very own citizens. This is very good because this means that the money being paid back is actually staying within the United States and going back to its own citizens. People who are getting interest payments from these bonds are likely to spend that money in the US, which will recirculate that money back into the United States economy. 11% is owned by the Federal Reserve, and 27% is owned by the federal government itself. This might sound weird, but this basically means that the government is loaning money to itself. This happens because some portions of the government actually make more money than they spend. So the safest thing to do with the extra money is to buy government bonds. And if they need extra funding in the future, they will simply sell the bonds. 29% is held by foreign investors in other countries. Investors in other countries see the United States government as a safe investment, instead of buying their own government bonds, which might not be as safe. So in reality, the United States government owes itself and its own citizens more money than it does any other foreign country. In order to understand how the US national debt works, you have to realize that it's not like a $25 trillion credit card debt with crazy interest and late fees. This debt actually can be good. I know that sounds crazy to think because we all been told that debt is debt and it's all bad, but think of it like this. If you want to buy a house for $1 million and you have the cash to buy it outright, before you spend all your cash, a lender comes along and says, I'll give you a loan for $1 million at 1% interest a year. They also say you never have to pay the whole loan off as long as you keep paying 1% interest. Since you already have the $1 million to pay it back, the loan lender sees this as a safe investment. Since you only have to pay 1% interest, you know this is a great deal, because you could simply just put that money into a savings account, making over 1% interest, and profit the difference, and never actually have to pay down the loan. You also have to take inflation into account, which is around 2% a year. So if you don't pay the debt off, the cheaper and cheaper it will become. So even if you did nothing but hold on to all the cash, you will profit 1% a year from inflation. So that $1 million loan will actually make you way more money than if you paid it for the house in full. This also applies to national debt. With interest rates almost at zero, if the US government just holds on to the $25 trillion of debt, it becomes easier to pay. It actually makes sense for the US government to take advantage and borrow as much as they need. You also have to look at the total value of the United States and its citizens. The total assets are almost $270 trillion, and the total outstanding debt is $146 trillion. This means that the United States has a net worth of around $124 trillion. The United States also owns 1/3 of the world's total wealth. So when you really look at it, $25 trillion of national debt is not that much. That is like saying Jeff Bezos is $20 million in debt, but in the context of his total net worth, this is just a drop in the bucket. The national debt is also measured against GDP, or how much revenue the country produces, and as of 2019, the US had just over $21 trillion of GDP, which at the time was about how much national debt we had. So the United States was breaking even, but with inflation, the debt was still getting cheaper. The only issue we really face is if the debt gets out of control and starts exceeding how much the country makes. If interest rates begin to rise, especially over the rate of inflation, then that debt starts to become more expensive as time goes on. This can get out of control and start to drain money from other resources just to pay down the more expensive debt. If this does happen, then the United States government will need more money, and this means higher taxes. After World War II, the national debt skyrocketed because we needed funding for the war. The amount of debt actually exceeded the total GDP of the United States at this time. This debt had to be paid back down, and that was done through higher taxes. In 1994, the top tax bracket, with people making over $200,000, was 94%. In today's money, that would be equivalent to earning over $2.9 million. The big worry is that we are getting to this point and have the huge pile of debt and historically low interest rates. Interest rates start to go up and inflation goes down, we might be left holding a ticking time bomb. This is like opening an 18-month interest-free credit card and maxing it out. After the 18 months, you have to figure out how to pay it off because you realize it has a 20% interest now. Another concern is that we are just kicking the problem to the next generation, and they will figure it out or get burdened by higher taxes and crumbling infrastructure. Should we actually be worried about our national debt then? The answer is probably not. We actually make a lot more money than our total national debt compared to other countries. Sure, we might owe the most, but we make a lot more than other countries. So the amount of debt we are taking out is relatively reasonable. The plan with all this debt is to just keep interest rates low and let inflation chip away at the debt. With that, there's no reason to pay this debt down early, and it would cost a lot more in the long term if the debt was actually paid down. The only real issue is if the economy stops growing and people stop investing in the United States. Investing in the United States is seen as one of the most safest investments you can make. This is why they can get away with paying so little interest on the money they borrow. But if the economy starts to slow and other countries' economies begin to ramp up, investors might start investing in those other countries for a safe return. Then interest rates will be forced to rise to entice people to invest back into the US. And this will definitely mean higher taxes to keep up with interest rates on the national debt. As of right now, the national debt is at a manageable level, but can be more of a concern if interest rates begin to rise or the debt continues to grow unchecked above our GDP. When you look at the bigger picture and analyze the United States as a whole, you begin to realize the national debt isn't as bad as it seems. And with that being said, as always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe to see more.